open the 9 o'clock hearing and we're going to recess until 9:30. again, open the revenues executive session, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If senators can lead us, sir.
Give Senator D'Alessandro a second, spitting self-around. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So, as y'all remember from last week's revenue projections, we left off and left, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 taxes that we didn't discuss. We need to come down to some revenue projections are. The business taxes in general split between business profits and business enterprise, the M&R tax, the real estate tax, the utility property tax, and the Medicaid recoveries. We're going to start with the easy one, Medicaid recoveries, and I recognize Senator Rosenwald.
So LBA did its usual magic and came up with a 10-year history of this revenue. And I think you all have it. The department's presentation said 23 was an anomalous year, but if you look at the past history going back 10 years, that's really less the case. So I'm going to propose that we do 3 million a year instead of the department's 2 million.
Thank you, Senator. So again, we're looking at this sheet right here that was passed out by Chris at the LBA, and you'll see that almost every year going back for a decade, we've been over $3 million to the high point of $11 million in 2013. So I think, I'd support that recommendation of $3 million. Is there any other discussion?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We'll set the 24 at $3 million. And Senator, your intention to also do 25 at $3 million? Yes. So for both years, we set it at $3 million.
And to confirm, 23 is at 3.4 million?
I'm sorry, yes. And for 23, we'll accept the $3.4 million. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Good. All right. So 3.4, 3030. For 23, 24, 25. Next up, let's go to utility property tax. We'll work our way up the sheet. As we last left off, there's a discussion about how much growth was going to happen. The agency came in at, remember, let me pull up her sheet, Lindsay's sheet.
Is this the report?
What's it? So I'll just I'm using the sheet that DRA gave us last week, the one, Senator Rosenwald, just to tell me what the agency's recommendation area was. So for 23, the updated recommendation was between 40.6 and 41.5 as revenue coming in for 2023.
If members can't find that document, if you have the worksheet that I gave you today, turn to page 3 and you'll see the ranges in there from DRA as well.
So I think when we left off, we were just discussing how much growth we thought was going to happen within the industry. I was looking, I know of me, I was looking at splitting the difference between DRA's high and low for 23 and coming at 41, which is dead middle of their proposals. And then the question is, the high, what range do we want to take for the growth in 24 and the growth in 25? The agency's recommendations between 0 and 3% increase year over year for both years. So discussion. So if we start, let's start this way. How about we assume that we start at, everybody, I'm going to propose we use $41 million for the base in 23. Does that sound reasonable?
Well, if we take the 41.5 for 23, we're pretty much done. Haven't we received all of that revenue at this point in time?
Commissioner, come up and join us.
Good morning. For the record, Lindsay Stepp, Commissioner, New Hampshire Department of Revenue. And for UPT, we will see sorry, I flipped to the wrong page. We're going to see another round of estimate payments in June. We will see another round of UPT estimate payments in June. So not all of the revenue has been collected yet at this point.
But it was June.
So the question, higher and low, it's going to fall in.
Correct.
So again, I'll make a motion to accept $41 million as the base for 23.
Second that.
Okay, I think that's good.
All in favor, say aye.
All right.
Opposed, nay. So we're starting with a $41 million base revenue for utility property tax. And then the question is, what do we think is going to happen in 23 and 24? The agency's range is between 0 and 3%.
I would suggest, if I might, Mr. Chairman, that we look at 42 for 24 and 43 for 25. I think they're very reasonable estimates based on where things are going at the present time.
Is that a motion?
It is a
It's
motion.
been moved and seconded to make 2024 $42 million and 2025 $43 million. Commissioner, have any comments on? It works out to be, I think, somewhere around a 1.8 or something like that.
Looks like
2.1.
almost 2.5% growth in the first year, and then just under 2.5 in the second year. So that's well within our range. I think that's very reasonable.
Good.
All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, and we've cleaned that one.
All right.
Let's move on to the real estate transfer tax.
Senator, before you go there, could I just have you look at the lottery in fiscal year
Oh, I'm sorry,
24?
thank you.
I put 159 million. I believe the committee had agreed to 160 million, so I just need to make that fix on the sheets.
So there's a typo on the worksheet for year 24, fiscal year 24. On your sheet, it should say 159. It's really 160 we voted on.
Hold on, what page are we on?
If you're looking at the worksheet, it's page 5,
Page 5.
column M,
Okay,
and it's row 21.
okay, we're looking at M lottery.
Yep.
Yep.
So for 23, the agency agreed to a $2 million increase, which should have been 160, but
Okay.
LBA accidentally put in
Okay,
159.
okay.
Right.
Are we taking 180 for 23?
The committee has already agreed to the 180 number,
Right.
and they had agreed to a 160 for fiscal year 24. I had put in 159, so I
Right,
just
I
wanted
got
the
it,
committee to know
Thank you.
that I'm going to fix that.
Okay,
Yep, so the three numbers are 180, 160, 164
great.
for that.
Yep.
Good, yeah.
So
Good.
we're just fixing a typo, so everyone
Right.
knew that it was really 160.
Okay,
All
good.
right, moving on to real estate transfer tax. So this is going to be an interesting one in that where, just understanding there's some transfers that come out of this fund. And Chris, we're working on the bottom number, right?
So
The net number that's going
page
to the
4.
general fund, not the
Real
not
estate
the
transfer.
gross number.
Yeah, based on what you told me, that you had already deducted for that in the estimates that you're going to suggest.
Right. So for 23, the agency's range was between 211.1 and 217.4 is where they think net revenues are going to come in for the general fund. Conversation around that. I was thinking around 215 myself, which is a little bit on the like 60% up from their, between their range. So
260?
215 was the number I was thinking, was to start
215.
23 with.
The agency gave us a high of 217.4 and a low of 211. The House estimated 228.5. And the government estimate was 243. And what do you suggest?
Well, we asked Commissioner let her talk
Commissioner-
about it.
Sure. So the governor's estimates, just remember those were done, late January, early February for the Valentine's Day presentation. At that time, Rhett was still performing very well. In the months since, as we went into the slowing of the winter and really a decline in the number of transactions, we have seen the Rhett revenue decrease. So again, with the House doing their estimates in February as well, the revenues were still looking strong because the first half of the year had been quite strong. But now we're really seeing RET performing very close to plan. And so I think the low estimate assumes that we will just meet plan for the last 2 months of the year. But year to date, we have been slightly over plan. And then the high estimate assumes that we will remain at that % ahead of plan. But really just the difference between our range now in the House and the governor's estimates is just timing, and the fact that we have additional revenue that we've received. And it didn't come in as high as it had been at the beginning of the year.
And is there an issue around a transfer, $5 million transfer that wasn't accounted for as well, that didn't come either the House or governor's number?
No, the $5 million did come out of those, I believe of those, that transfer happens in October. So that should have come out of their numbers.
So how do we feel about the 215 number, which is,
pretty
means that
aggressive.
we'll be slightly above plan, but not at the top, not at high performance
For 23?
for 23?
215? Okay.
All those in favor of 215, say aye.
All right.
Opposed, nay? All right, so we'll start with 23 with a base of 215.
Senator Ennis, you have a question?
It just seems aggressive, but all right.
Well, again, I think we're talking about the current year, right? So I think
Yeah.
that this year has
For
been
23,
aggressive and
yeah.
we're in great shape, right?
Yeah.
But going to next year is going to be a different conversation we're about to have.
Yes.
But I think that this year has been a pretty aggressive year for real estate action, but it's been slowing down, at least everything I've seen, it's slowing down. So let's get into 24 and 25. So the agency gave us actually a range of -5 to 0. Anticipating we're going to be below this year's number.
Yep.
So I was being ultra conservative, and I was thinking a full -5 based on what we see going on in the industry for 24. We know that the Fed is indicating they're going to raise the rates again by another quarter basis point, which will drive mortgage rates up higher again, which will have an impact. And we know that the housing market has been it's actually in a decline as far as the number of transactions that are happening. I mean, they're higher value. There are fewer transactions occurring. So I was being more aggressive in saying I wanted to take the full -5% to be conservative because the housing market is a complete mess. I'd rather guess on the low side.
I think though in New Hampshire, most of the weakness is due to a lack of supply.
Right.
As much as anything. I mean, anything that comes on the market's still selling. So we're also trying to predict supply, which is tough. I mean, you're right, mortgage rates have an impact, but at some point that starts to wash out. I don't know that 200 is, I mean, that's just.
Too low.
Yeah, I think so.
Way too low.
Yeah.
So the number would be, if we did a full 5% reduction over 23, the number is 204.3.
Yeah.
If we did a full 5% reduction. And then my thought was I was going to leave 25 alone at a 0. I'd take the full loss in 24 until the market corrects itself, and then I think it stabilizes. So that was my thought on this market based on what I've read about real estate. Full -5 on 24 and 0 on 25.
We always have an anomaly in the real estate transfer tech. We have one huge sale that comes just about at the end of the year. It's happened every year that I've been around here.
Yeah.
A big transaction. Now, what about the transaction that's taking place in Hudson, where I think Target has taken over the Amazon project, and that's a multi-billion-dollar sale, isn't it?
So to your point about anomalous transactions, we do try to track those. I will say there is a difference between an anomalous transaction where we see a large transaction and it doesn't happen every year.
Right.
But to your point, if we consistently see anomalous transactions, each one is individual. But when looking year to year, if we're consistently seeing some large transactions, then they're almost not anomalous
Yeah.
because we're expecting them
Right, sure.
to occur.
And I think with the carve out of 4A, there's 1,000 acres of land that is going to be made available for construction. And I know that Market Basket owns Demoulas owns most of that land. They're going to develop that land, and they're going to develop it soon. And the exit is in progress as we speak. I've seen the work going on there. I think we could take a shot and not reducing this as much as you want.
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to be enormous growth in that area. Just drive down and look at the exit. The 1,000 acres of land in Londonderry is very attractive. Senator Constant would love that.
Right.
I think that's
Oh, yeah,
gonna
and large
be-
transaction, right, is gonna
Right.
change this whole model, right?
Oh, yeah,
Again,
that's
you have
all
a
the
$100
time.
million transaction happen, all of a sudden that's $4.5 million,
Right.
whatever, back into the tax rolls we hadn't accounted for, right?
Right.
So, and anybody selling a building or selling a product, so,
Right.
again, this is a little bit of a dart throw. I am a little
Yeah.
concerned by the conversation with the builders who said that the cost of building is so high that they have projects on hold
Yeah.
right now, that they can't even, while they know they could probably, if they built the house, they might be able to sell it, but they don't think they can sell it at a price that will make it worth their effort to build. And so until that market, that's my concern, is that market is really, I agree with Senator Innes's point. You build it, someone will buy it probably,
Yeah.
but the question is how much profitability can you make out of it? Is it worth your effort to build it?
Yeah.
And I think that's what builders are struggling with right now, is the fact that they can build it and probably sell it, but their margins are so small, even smaller now, that there's not an incentive to build it until the rates all, cost of borrowing money goes down, the cost of mortgages go down. So that was my concern, and why I think that the industry's gonna be struggling in '24, but I think it settles out in '24 and '25, stays level.
Thank you. In Merrimack and Nashua also, there is quite a bit of multi-family development still happening, condos and
Yeah.
across the street from me, there 25 houses are about to be built in the next 2 years.
I think that works.
I still feel like people are trying to move to New Hampshire.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess I'd be more willing to split the difference between the agency low and the house. But it just feels
There's a lot of activity.
overly doomsaying
Right.
to go
Yeah.
down to agency.
we could knock the edges off and go with 3%.
We could run.
Knock the edges off and go to 3% instead of the 5%. You were saying 2.5%?
Yeah, something more in the middle
Yeah.
Right.
feels more,
So you wanna do 3 or 2.5? -3 or -2.5?
well,
It's a minor difference.
Well, what's the margin? Margin's de minimis.
Yeah,
So let's do a -2.5.
I'm fine with that. I think,
All right, so the new number would be 209.6
okay.
for '23, and if we're talking about '25 as well, I had a 0%. I figured the market's correction is gonna,
Yeah.
-2.5%, and then in '25 we'll stay at that
So you
same
carry
number.
it.
So we'll do
Okay.
209.6 for '24 and 209.6 for '25? Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Oh, let's make it 210
yeah,
for 25.
Yeah. Or-
easier.
It's nice and rounded. It's just a little
210.
bump up.
Okay,
How about Mr. Chair?
This is how sausage is made.
Get off to 210.
1 second, guys.
I'd rather get off to 210 rather than 208. please.
So that's what, you want to do 210 both years? and just be done with
Yes.
that? All right, that's fine.
I could,
All right, so we're looking at using 210 from Senator D'Alessandro, motion 210. So
Yeah.
Innes seconded it.
Yeah.
All those in favor of using 210 for years 24 and 25, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. That is
Okay.
our new number.
Great.
Let's go to M&R. Meals and rooms tax, or meals and rentals tax, depending on how old you are. The agency,
Where you got,
so we'll start with the 23 number. The agency came in, their range was 313 to 325.1.
Yeah.
I was, as a starting discussion point, I was thinking 320.6, again, in the middle. It gives us a little more aggressive, but on the top end of the middle.
And that's 23.
For 23, yeah, we use 320.6.
Is that number you think that's reasonable, given what we're seeing as we close out the year?
I do. The range was developed, the low assumes that we will be actual revenue for year to date with prior year revenue for the last 2 months,
Yeah.
but we've consistently been ahead of prior year, so the low is conservative. And then the high assumes that we remain 32.5% ahead of plan for the last 2 months. But as we've heard, with inflation and the cost of food, it may be starting to impact folks in their choices of eating out, et cetera. So I think that might be a little aggressive. So I do think hitting it right down the middle is probably a safe bet.
Okay.
So I'm moving
Thank you.
20.6 for
I'll second.
23, and
I'll
seconded
second
by
that.
Senator Innes. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We start a base year of 2023 at 320.6.
Now,
So the question is, what do you think is going to happen over the next, so there's two other things that we have to deal with. And Chris, do you want to explain the changes in law that as we adapt this number, what it really means?
So due to the transfer to the municipal revenue fund, so the 30% transfer that occurs to the municipals, you take the revenue collected in the year prior and you have to adjust that against the year you're predicting. So in 23, we know that $128 million is being transferred to the municipal fund based on 22 revenue. So when we do 24 and 25 projections, we need to make an adjustment for that transfer. It's not just a straight 30% because there's some adjustments to the gross number before you get to that 30%.
So to that point, I think instead of talking about millions of dollars, I want to talk about percentages. Because Chris will calculate the percentage for us. If we think what this industry is going to do as a percentage, then Chris will give us the new number for whatever percentage we settle on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, this is my industry, so I just want to kind of lend my experience on this. Coming out of COVID, the restaurant businesses saw a lot of business come in. And part of that was pent up demand in the restaurant side, and that's largely abated. But what people don't necessarily think about is the fact that there was a year and a half of people that wanted to have weddings, and they wanted to have corporate parties, and they wanted to have Christmas parties, and they wanted to have reunions, and all that stuff happened after we reopened. But that well is beginning to run dry. The phone's ringing less and less because at long last that demand has been met. And so I think there's potential trap here if we get used to thinking we're going to see 5 and 6% increases every year. I would urge the committee to be a bit conservative in this number because the function business isn't going to be as good this year as it was last year.
very true.
And that's in my industry, in my business personally, that's about 25 to 30% of my revenues. So.
Senator Roosevelt?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Given that we know that there's a lot of bookings for 24 in hotels, if people are coming from out of state, they're also going to be eating in restaurants. So how do we factor that in, that all of the hotels and Airbnbs are like fully booked for 24?
If I might. I think there are a couple things to think about here. One of course, is the volume of travelers and diners, but the second is the pricing of what they're buying. And I think part of the revenue increase we've seen is the increase in restaurant prices, food prices, also hotel rates. I think we'll see softness on the hotel side first, on the rate end, and everything suggests we're headed at least into a slowdown as we get into the next, the quarter to end the year. The question is, how significant is that? I don't know that we retreat, but I don't think we see the level of growth we've seen. It might be largely flat for a little bit.
Well, in listening to the news this morning, the travel plans for the summer are just way up.
They're still strong.
Yeah, very, very, very strong. And I noticed your place last night was loaded with cars. You were loaded with cars. There was no room in the parking lot. So as a result of that, people have to be buying something or drinking something.
Yeah.
I think that we can't underestimate what's going to happen. The traffic flow hasn't reached where it was pre-pandemic, but it picks up on Friday and Saturday, which
Yeah.
is the big time for us. This is when R&M is really that's where people go.
Yeah.
People go. So I think we could. I think we can't be too conservative. It's always been a good deliverer for us, and I would be I would be obviously cautious, but I think we could be a little bit robust here in terms of our predictions. Look, I look at what the governor has. I looked at what the House estimates. The House jacked them up pretty good.
Yeah.
And your high estimate is significant in both years. So I think I think the low is just way too low. So where do we go at this point in time? We got a restaurant tour here who should know the business, right? That's your livelihood, and you've got to be optimistic about what's going to happen.
I don't have to be.
And as I said, I have been listening to the projections. Air travel is way up. The flights are all booked. Airbnbs are in pretty good shape. And New Hampshire's the place to go to. And we got the primary coming up. We got the look at what's happening tonight at St. Anselm College. So all of these things play a role in the development of this tax because they eat and they drink and they stay home.
So the only thing I'll bring up is that understand we're starting our base of 23, $12.1 million above the House already, right? So, and there are some statutory changes which will actually reduce that number in 23, 24 and 5, but just understand we're starting at a higher level than the House as we're already being optimistic, so.
We've got better figures than the House had.
It
is
is true that this is a primary year and that brings in a ton of people and this should be a good year on the hotel side and it does translate into additional food sales. I just want to reiterate the testimony we got from the Restaurant and Lodging Association. And they said that our revenues are probably up because the prices are up. The prices are up a lot because their costs are up. And that I'm sitting here nodding my head and listening to them because it's exactly what I have found. I would urge the committee to stick to, a 2% increase, something along those lines, and stay modest. Don't look to the sky here because the restaurant industry is a leading indicator. We're the first to feel a recession if and when it comes. And I am seeing softness in my numbers, especially in Manchester. Manchester is not a tourist destination where people are flying in other than for primary reasons. No one's flying in to come hang out in Manchester. I wish that were different as someone who lives there and has businesses there, but it's just not. It's not the Lakes region. It's not the Seacoast. No one's coming to see sunny Manchester for a week. So I see softness in my numbers there. And I want the numbers to be accurate. I don't want us to find ourselves in a $10 million hole in this number. So I would urge a 2% increase.
I think the 2% is spot on, and what's ironic is I was thinking that's probably the right number for 24. And 25, maybe another 2. I don't know. I see the softness in hotel rates on the Seacoast. I'm teaching in the program at UNH. I still, even though I'm not in the business directly here, I can say in another place where I'm invested in restaurants, we're seeing that flatness. Things aren't going down, but they're not going up.
But I don't know the Seacoast as well as you. You came from the Seacoast, but I've noticed the building that has taken place in Portsmouth. Those are hotel rooms.
Yes.
And they are growing dramatically. Downtown is unbelievable, and the rental space downtown is quite expensive.
It is. It's more than Boston.
Yeah, it's so there's big situations, big things taking place there.
Senator Roosevelt?
Thank you. I'm looking back over my notes from the presentation we had from Mr. Bouchard. Boucher.
Oh, yeah, Tom,
Right.
Yeah.
Tom and Mike, yeah.
Yep. And he said he's not bullish, but he also didn't say he was bearish. So, I mean, I think 2% might be reasonable, at least for 24, 25 we should talk about, but
All right, so let's start with 24. Chris, can you do the calculation for 24 with the 2% increase and the statutes?
So your number would be 320.6.
320.6.
320.6,
So what you get?
24.
Could we make it,
Oh, okay.
that's.
Yeah.
So it ends up being flat.
2%.
So we're saying flat over 23, but because of legislative changes.
You're saying
it looks
2%
flat,
growth
but
and then
we're
it
really
looks
talking
flat.
about growth. So do you guys understand that? Is that?
Yes.
If you look 23 and 24, it'd be the same exact number, and you say, wait, there's no growth in that. But the
Right.
reality is due to statutory changes,
Changes.
that 2% gets eaten up by the changes in the law.
Right.
So all those in favor of using 3,020.6 for 24, say aye.
All right.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We're going to start with 24 at 320.6. So talk about 25. So here's where I start having, I get a little bearish in 25. When bullish. Oh, you're bullish in 25. So I'm just the opposite. So I think that when we look at consumer side conversation, right? We talk about the fact that consumer savings is way down, right? They've expended where we were at a high just 18 months ago. That spending is now at a low in savings. And yet just the inverse happened on credit card debt. Is that credit card debt is at an extreme high
Right.
and our savings are at extreme low from where it was just 2 years ago. And so my concern is that as we start playing out into 25, everything's tapped out, right, on consumers, right? So my concern would be, I would want to stay at zero. Just say, I'm not predicting anything happening, anything better. We have the 2% increase in 24 and 0% in 25.
Well-
Because I'm not sure that with everything going on in the economy, that's there. Listening to, and the reason why I'm okay with 24, even 2%, is we heard about, we've got, the summers and falls seem to be booked out in 24 with no problem. We got the first of the nation coming in January, and then we have the eclipse in April, but that's all 24 activity. I didn't hear a single thing happening in 25 that makes them think they're going to grow.
Well, look,
And they're gonna have activity. So I would be more bearish on it and say, let's stay at least level funded and not presume that we're gonna grow again beyond 24 where we had these strong indicators.
let me inject one thought. If the business level stays the same, fine, but we are going to have inflation, right? So, we're sort of discussing this as if there's no inflation right now. There will be. What will it be? The number came in today, we're down to a 4.9% annual rate. It's still going to be 3 to 5% inflation. So I think you have to factor that in a little bit, which might give us a little headroom to come up 1% or 2%.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
So if we have, let's say we have a recession this year, they usually last about a year. And then we start to grow out of it. So I think also in combination with the fact, and I don't have numbers for this, but we hear this all the time, there is a lot of stress and mental health challenges. And I think one of the easiest ways people self-medicate through that is by, even if they can't afford it, going to a restaurant or going to a bar.
Very true.
And I don't know how to wrap a number around
By
it,
that.
but I think we're sensing it by all the inflection points that we do see in terms of who's looking for therapy, who's going to DCYF. I mean, we're just seeing a lot of a lot of emotional stress. And I think the easiest way to address it is by putting food in your mouth.
It's
So,
it's so true.
I can do that.
It-
Well,
it-
I'm
it-
sorry.
You get that, look at the obesity situation, direct result of that. Direct result of it. Stress, eat, it's true. Yeah.
All right.
So, so
yeah.
Murphy, any comment about 25? You're in the industry. I know you're, again, we're throwing darts and we're looking through a.
25 is a crystal ball scenario.
Yeah.
You know, just as I said, restaurants are leading indicators. While we're the first to feel a recession, we're the first to come out of the recession. People get it. The bar business isn't really typically hit by a recession very, very much, but the restaurant business is, because those are discretionary dollars.
Yeah.
You can always go to the market basket and buy food and drink for about a quarter to a third of the price that you will pay for it at my restaurant. And that's the way it is. What we sell is really fun and experience, interaction. And people always need that to a degree.
Yeah.
Having said that, which percentage is going to be? I think Senator Innes makes a great point. It talks about inflation being intrinsic. So even without a growth in business, you're going to see maybe some increase.
Yeah.
I don't think necessarily need to be flat. If you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say another 1.5%, 2%.
I'll propose that we move to 325 for fiscal year 2025. That's a slight increase, couple percentage points just shy of that. So it captures the inflation, but it says, well, we might be flat.
325,
Yeah.
I could support that.
So it's
Okay.
been moved by Senator Innes to set 325 and seconded by Senator Alessandro, and that's our net number, so you'll have to back into the person.
2.2%. To get to 325 net would be a 2.2% growth.
That feels right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
All those in favor of 325 for year 25, say aye.
Yeah.
Those stay? Ayes have it.
Great.
That's 6 million over the house number, huh?
I think it's probably pretty close. I mean, it's as close as we
Well,
can get.
so it's gonna be,
We'll see.
yeah, 6.1 over the house. Start. Carl, now we come to the more difficult discussion. So business taxes. The agency proposed a range for 23 of 1251.5 to 1265.8. Commissioners, anything that would, based on April numbers, or anything else that would change that range?
Nothing has changed that range. It's still before any significant money that we would see in May, although May tends to be a small month. So there's no additional information that would change that range at this point.
Question,
So we'll start with the 23 number. Do we want to do our, seems to be what we've been doing, is taking kind of a split in the middle, saying, because I think 1251 is assuming plan, correct? And the 1265 is assuming the aggressive growth we've seen all year round. So we're saying that the last 2 months of the year are probably the average, a little above average.
yeah.
So
Good.
how do we feel about using 1260? How do we feel about using 1260 for the business taxes as our base for 23?
Yeah.
So that's my motion. Anybody?
I'll second that. Seems reasonable.
So using 1260 as our base for 23. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So we're at 1260. Now we really go in our crystal ball and we're trying to guess what's going to happen over the next 2 years in business taxes and business and the industry. The agency's range is between 0 and 2% growth. So they are being fairly conservative on this growth rate.
We hope.
Is there any, Mr. Chairman, is there any, do we know why the House predicted a $35 million drop?
Sorry, go ahead. I believe part of the drop in the House is they assumed some amount of growth, but there's those tax law changes that are going to come into effect. So they assumed growth, but for 24, there's a $25 million tax law change impact, which I think caused it to end up with a decrease.
All right, so we should take into account the same consideration.
But you did with this number right on your sheet, because that, the range, again, if I'm looking at you.
The range, you'll apply the growth to the net number for 23, and then we'll take the $25 million out after applying the growth. So if you were going to assume flat of the 1260 from 23 to 24, we would then take that 1260 and deduct the 25 million from that.
So let's,
So what's,
What percentages do the agency high and low represent?
Agency low is 0, so flat, and the high is 2%, and that's the same for 24 and 25.
we got those figures.
I'd be comfortable with splitting the difference,
so just do a 1% growth,
at
do the
least
same
for
thing.
24.
Right.
same thing for 25? The 1%
It's
growth.
murky.
Again, there,
It's
I know, it's
murky.
even murkier.
My
It's
crystal
even
ball
murkier.
is
Right, well, okay.
murky.
We don't have a federal budget.
Turn your mics off, guys, so Chris.
Yep.
Thank you. So just to reiterate what Lindsay said, you're going to come up with a new base, and then there'll be a deduction based on the tax law changes. So even though you're saying if you say it's a no growth, it's going to look like you've decreased it by 25 million in 24 or by 3.8 million in 25. So just keep that in mind as you're coming up with your percentages. It's on the base number from the previous year. So for 24, it's going to be based on your 23 base number. And then you're going to subtract 25 million from that. That's the new base you're going to grow and subtract 3.8 from that.
So Chris, we said 1260 for 23. Is that the number, looking at page 3 of this worksheet? We didn't propose that for the 1268 up here at the low end. Is that down here?
Right.
All right. So the 1260 is post tax law changes, but now we need to go back to before pre-tax law changes.
Yep, because you've created a new base. So the assumption I'm making is that in 23, you've already accounted for the 17.1 when Senator Lang came up with his
So-
projection.
So really, we're at 12.
So if we assume 1%
77.
we still have to subtract that $5 million. Right?
25 million. Yeah.
Let's back up for a second. Let's change our, let's, for discussion purposes, let's move to gross revenues. So, and then we'll subtract out the 25 and that'll give us the growth number. So if we look at gross numbers and do the difference, Chris, can you tell me what the middle number is that's equal to about 1260? What would be the gross number we would need,
So all you need to do is if 1260 is your base number
right?
for 20, that's your 23 number. That's your new base for 24 to grow off from. So if you think that 24 is going to grow by 1%, it would be 1260 times 101% to give you that growth. And then from that, we would subtract the 25 million. That would be the number that you would collect. That would be the revenue going to the
Right.
General Fund
I
Education
assume
Trust Fund.
1260 is a net number, not a gross number, right? Because our gross number, her low on the gross is 1268.
Yep.
And so,
And you're fine to do that. You're fine. The way Chris is explaining it is the way that these tax law change numbers were developed. So the 25 million is an impact to the net. The reason why, I know this is confusing, the reason why we're going to talk net numbers for business taxes, but we talked gross numbers for M&R is because for M&R, that's revenue that was collected. We're just moving it into a fund that's not the general fund, and you're trying to come up with general fund estimates. So we collected that M&R revenue. If you want to grow it, we want to grow all of the revenue that was collected, even the part that moved out of the general fund. Now, when we're talking about business taxes, these tax law changes mean that we're not going to collect the revenue. So we don't want to apply the growth rate to the gross number because it's foregone revenue. We're not going to receive it. We want to apply the growth rate to the net and then take the year over year tax law change impact, which in 24 is 25 million, and then in 25 drops to 3.8 million. So net, growing on net is the way that you should do business taxes.
So if we take a 1% growth each year, our new bottom lines for 24 and 25 are 1273 and 1285.
Those are good numbers.
What's that?
Those are good numbers.
Yeah. So that would be assuming a 1% growth over each year, starting with a base of 1260. Does that sound reasonable for everybody?
It sounds reasonably conservative. Yes.
So for 2023, again, if you're keeping track, the new number, it'll be 1273. And for 25, the bottom would be 1285.
Okay.
That assumes a 1% growth year over year. Good. Commissioner, in case if I'm wrong, I want to make sure we do this right.
So let's just do 24 first.
Okay.
So the 1273 is the 1%
Over 1260.
over 1260. We then need to subtract the 25 million for the tax law change.
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
Good.
No.
Where will we see that in the budgeting process, Chris? Is that going to be on the surplus statement?
So what'll happen is that these net numbers will be put into House Bill 1 unrestricted revenue.
Okay,
So we've made the adjustments. There'll be no need to put any surplus statement, anything on the surplus statement. It's basically accounting for the current tax law changes. So these are current law that is reducing rates, the carry credit, threshold, filing thresholds, single sales factors, all these things that have been put into law in the last few years. The department has made an assumption that the impact of that is going to be $25 million in 24. So we're going to take that off your number and then use the net number for your revenues.
so
So the number 1247.6.
where the House put in 1235 for 23, we're going to see 1260.
Yes,
And where they put in 1200,
you're going
we're
to see
going to see
1247.
1273. So it's already got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I have a question, just a quickie?
I want to make sure we talk, so the two numbers we had, were 1273, and you're saying for us to adopt the net number, we need to subtract 25 million out of that, so the real number is 1247,
Correct.
right? And then but for 2025, we only have to subtract out $3.8 million.
Right,
Yes. But you need to grow the 1% on the 1247.
right.
So take the
1% on
1247
All right, so that changes the number.
on the 1% and then subtract the 3.8.
Just for those of us keeping score, we're now at $73 million
Yeah,
over the House number, the House projection, just for the first 2 years, just for 23 and 24. Okay.
Yeah, just, I was gonna say,
Okay.
give that to us again, Mr. Chairman.
So
How we arrived here.
So if we start at a base of 1273, we subtract out the 25 million, that's 1247. And then if we're assuming there's a 1% growth, that's a 1% growth on the 1247,
Okay,
right? And that number becomes 1260. And then we have to subtract $3.8 million out of that.
Got it.
Which gives us a new number of 1256, if my math is right.
Correct.
Does that make sense, everybody?
Question. So are we comparing 1247 and 1256 to the House Ways and Means estimates that are listed here? Or do those estimates still have to subtract 25 million?
The House accounted for these same adjustments.
So 1247 is compared to 1200 for 24.
Yes,
So we are comparing
it's
apples.
an apples to apples comparison when you make
Okay.
those adjustments.
And we are boosting projected revenue $114 million over House revenues. Not that I necessarily want to always look back at the house, but I want to make
Right.
sure that we're on the
Right.
same page.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more question?
So
Is
just
the
make- so we're all
1260
clear on-
net? Okay, so it is going down because of tax law changes.
Right.
Thank you.
So to be clear, the numbers, we're looking at a 1247 for 24. That assumes a 1% increase less the tax changes. And then in 25, we're looking at 1256, which assumes a 1% increase over 24 minus tax law changes. Everybody clear? All right, so all those in favor of those two, I'll make a motion to accept those two numbers for 24 and 25.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And we're done. We got that. Got through that easier than I thought. All right, I just want to talk about one, so we're done with revenue projections. Thank you, Commissioner. You guys have in front of you an amendment that we're going to take up next week. We have one bill left in front of us, House Bill 607. And Chris, I'm assuming you're going to clean up that spreadsheet and send it back out and do the business splits for me at the top so I can clean all up. Thank you. So we have House Bill 607 left on our docket for next week. This was an amendment that I brought forward to deal with an issue in all the changes we did in charitable gaming, increasing rates and wagers. One of the things that we didn't look at was what's called the rake, how much the house takes off for charities and for themselves.
Right.
And that impacts how much the players make. And so right now, current law has the rake at 20%. We increased it from $500 to $2,500, and that means that we increased the rate from $125 maximum to a $500 maximum, which means that the players are getting less money. So what this amendment does is just kind of splits the difference and says that we want the rate to be higher, but we also want the player to be able to get more money for their tournament that they're buying into. So instead of a player who would buy into a $2,500 buy-in could make $2,000, what I'm proposing is saying that when a player buys in at $2,500, the max they can make is $2,250, right? It makes it for the it's better for the player. A little worse for the house, but again, they're still making more money than they were making before because we have the rate increase from 125 to 250. We've doubled the revenue side for both the charities and for the businesses, but we're giving the player the difference. Good.
Okay.
What is the effect on the charities?
So charities are still going to see a doubling, right? So right now, the rate is at a maximum buy-in, it'll be $125 rate. And then the operator and the charity split the $125. Now what we're saying is the take-in is going to be a maximum of $250 and they'll split that instead. So the charity will get double the amount of money they get now.
Right.
It's just that the difference between the 250 and the 250 and the 500 is going to go to the player.
Yeah.
Is making it more equitable for the player. That makes sense. So we'll talk about that, and then hopefully we'll exec that tomorrow. I don't know if you saw the House exec some of our bills yesterday.
Next week.
I'll be next week. I apologize.
Right.
Next week. Didn't mean to scare you guys.
Yeah.
Next week, the House did exec some of our bills yesterday. They passed with a couple amendments. They passed 120. They passed the interest tax. They fixed the issue you brought up, Senator, about the way you take 100% of the deduction in the first year. We kind of left interest deduction in the first year. Yeah, I don't remember the number, but what they did was they fixed the problem I had where if you were carrying over previous years, we allow them to take that out until it's completed. So they fixed that issue through an amendment. On 120, they changed.
I'll be right back. Yeah.
In the law, we had, in that bill, we removed the definition of a minor
Thank you. Right.
deficiency and a moderate deficiency that lottery could then impose a consequence on the gaming operator. Lottery asked us to let them do it all in rules because we had these one-offs. So we're like, if these are examples of what a minor is and these are examples of what a moderate is. And they're like, we just deal with that in rules rather than have these one-offs that define. And so we agreed to that. However, the House did. the House wanted to put those examples back in to give an example of what a minor is and what an example of a minor. I don't have a particular issue with that, leaving it. It's, you know, it was, again, it was a request for lottery. So we can talk about it next week when I don't know when the House is going to vote on it, but we'll need to decide whether we want to concur or committee of conference. So.
A couple of things are happening through these.
Good.
There are a few things that are happening with those who are participating in the lottery. These 501(c)(3)s are not being renewed, and as a result, they're being restricted. So I'm sure others do this too, but I have to go to the lottery and ask for an extension because the IRS has not re-upped them. So this is going to hurt many of these entities if we don't get that squared away. And they come to me on a periodic basis, but for example, the Polish Club from Nashua came to me over the weekend. I took care of that. Okay, but they're only extended through the 30th of this month. And there's a game of chance in Wilton that needs to be done. They can't do that because of the problem with the renewal of the 501(c)(3). I think we should talk to Charlie about that and how we can play a role in extending those while the IRS is working on reaffirming their 501(c)(3) status. Because the charities will lose a lot of money if you can't run the games.
So the question is, can we somehow put a temporary extension, or allow lottery to allow a temporary extension of 501(c)(3) charity status, you know, based on an affidavit submitted by the charity saying, hey, we're waiting on the federal government and we just want you to extend our charity status for purposes of charitable gaming for another 6 months.
Exactly,
Okay.
right.
Yeah, we can look at that. We can figure out how we do that with Charlie.
Right, I think we should do that as a group, that way everybody's involved, they all know what we're doing, and the clubs know that we as a unit are working on their behalf.
So the other thing we can do is if we agree, we can talk to the governor about maybe an executive order even, right? Would probably a faster result than us trying to get a law passed or a change passed that they might
We
need.
could do something, because the federal government's the holdup, the IRS is the holdup. They're saying 120 days.
Yeah.
They need more agents.
All right, anything else? Come before the committee, yes.
Senator Innes and I have talked to LBA about drafting an amendment on Senate Bill 120 for House Bill 2, but it would be the Senate version if we got into conference and
Right.
wanted to change that provision, but the Senate
It
hasn't.
sounds like an issue for the finance committee.
Why not? We've been making House Bill 2 shorter, so this will make
Right.
it a little longer.
Anything else, guys? Sonny?
9 a.m.
Let's do 9:30 because of Keith, I know he doesn't get here till 9:15, so let's do 9:30 and give us a little bit of
Next one.
breathing room.
And you'll have us out here by 10.
Yeah, we'll be done by, we should be pretty quick. So, all right, guys?
All right.
Good. Adjourned.
Thank you.
I feel good about this.
Yeah, good solid numbers.